Welcome back, everybody. Happy Friday. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Today, we got a lot to unpack, so we're going to hop right into it. I'm welcoming back this week to the show fellow Talking Alternative broadcasting host. He's the host of Employment Law Today. He also has a practice in Midtown. He is an employment lawyer. Eric Sarver, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, Jeremiah. It's great to be here with you and great to be back. I think, I was here on your show, I think in August of 2020, right?
Yeah.
And I've got to say, like in the employment law realm, not much happening since then. Nothing going on really at all.
Not a bit. So I usually offer a message of the week, but since we're going to be talking about mandates and, certainly with all my millions of followers, I have listeners from outside of the New York City area. Sure. I just want to list instead of the message, just like what has changed in New York City in particular, this week and what's coming up. So the first change was starting December 14th, children ages 5 to 11 now have to show proof of vaccination to one shot if they want to dine indoors, if they want to go to an indoor gym or any other kind of entertainment that's indoors. If you're going to a movie theater, you're going to see a kids comedy show. I don't know what kids do these days. I don't take my kids anywhere. Yes. All of that. So 5 to 11 now roped into what was previously in existence for 12 and up. And now what's suggested for 12 and up is by December 27th, you have to show proof of 2 doses of whatever vaccine, unless it was the J&J, if you want to dine indoors.
Yes.
If you want to work out indoors, and if you want to do any kind of indoor entertainment. And newly added to this rollout was the private sector. I think something like 185,000 businesses are affected where the employees have to show proof of vaccination to work. So before it was simply relegated to restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues. So retail wasn't affected. So grocery stores, which was kind of silly, right? If you think about it, like these massive grocery stores, none of the employees or customers had to show proof of vaccination. And there were, mass mandates were essentially lifted, and they were working on the honor system to quote Andrew Cuomo. Yeah, just use the honor system. You could ask if they have, if they've been vaccinated, and if they say yes, you're like, okay, carry on. You don't have to wear a mask. But some of these stores, you can pack like hundreds of people in, and grocery shopping is not always that quick. If you're shopping for a family, sometimes you might be in there for a couple hours. So that part was kind of ignored, where like these, all these 25-seat restaurants throughout New York City got the thumb pressed on them again. I always thought that was a little funny. So now finally they've roped in all these other businesses, and they have until the 27th as well to show proof of vaccination. And just updated this week, because of an increase in cases, all indoor anything has to, you will be asked to show proof of vaccination if you do not want to wear a mask. So if you want to go into the deli and you don't want to wear a mask, got to show proof of vaccination just to come in and pick up like a bottle of water.
Very correct. Yeah, you got all the basics like down pat, like there, like Jeremiah, how it's changing the vaccine mandate, how it's evolving. I would say it's interesting. You raise a point I've seen or heard from my clients, like the business owners who are in the employment law aspect, who are restaurateurs, and there's often been this complaint about, well, why do we need these different mandates and mask mandates or proof of vaccination? Like if a grocery store does not, it's like, and it's been actually, the argument I heard advanced are twofold. One was that groceries are more of a mandatory thing that you need to go out and get. You have to buy food or diapers for your family that you don't quote unquote have to eat out in a restaurant, which doesn't really, when you think about it, like say impact the underlying issue of, like, is this a justified restriction based on health and safety? So it's an interesting point you raise. I think that a lot of restaurateurs said, well, if they don't have that mandate, why should we? What's ironic is that now the mandate's applying to both. And you're correct about the 5 to 11 category. Of course, as an employment law and business law attorney, I zero in on the private mandate for employers. And, I take it, I approach it from very different perspectives, like on behalf of my clients and my own personal views. But it's interesting, like you're correct that New York City has a very, very high, strict approach towards trying to contain this pandemic. And, they do so under certain authority and powers that the states and the municipalities have, right, to police people in terms of health, public safety, and well-being. And that's actually ironically why they say that the New York City mandate for employers might have a better chance, of surviving a court challenge, let's say, than the Biden administration's, the federal vaccine mandate for 100 employees and more, or in that case, alternating testing and masking. So, but you're correct about how it's been expanding, and it's now also not just about patrons; it's about employees. So every employer has to know about these important updates.
And the other thing that they expanded too, because I started to see this play out as the temperature changed, especially in Manhattan. All these restaurants had these outdoor structures, and they started to enclose them. So it didn't apply to outdoor dining. So they weren't checking, you could sit in this enclosed outdoor structure on the street.
Right.
Excuse me. And you didn't have to show proof of vaccination. But if you went inside, you did. And now they finally clarified the other day, and they said if you have 3 sides covered on your 3 sides and a covering on your outdoor structure, they have to also show proof of vaccination to sit in the outdoor thing. So there's all these little holes and cracks, and it just makes you wonder sometimes. And the other thing that I just wanted to bring up early on in this was that, for the most part, as you pointed out, this is largely affected business and customers, unless it's a municipal building or something of that nature. So you've got federal travel mandate. If you go into any municipal building, whether it be federal, state, or city, you've got to abide by all these regulations, and then obviously private businesses has not gotten to the point. I mean, I think about like France and Italy in the early days of their lockdown, like you had to schedule your trip to the grocery store. You couldn't just like freely walk out. I mean, they really had people strapped in their homes. It hasn't come to that point here. Yeah. So let's hope it does not. But you're in this position where like the majority of the mandates are really dealing with, do you represent any municipal organizations, or is it strictly private business that you deal with in your practice?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. I think it's a really good question for this topic. So I don't represent like municipalities. Like usually the federal and state and city governments have their own in-house internal staff counsel on board that represent them in these issues and other issues that might come up. I represent private employers. I've just represented a handful of nonprofit organizations over the years, but not municipalities and such. So to your point, if you're a state employee and you're a healthcare worker, the vaccine mandate has been held up as affirmed by the courts, and you have to have that. The federal vaccine mandate for healthcare workers is now being stayed in the courts. Basically, it's fought out in the Court of Appeals, they're duking it out. And the Supreme Court recently heard a case, and they're saying, okay, we're going to update, rather affirm and uphold these injunctions so that these vaccine mandates for healthcare workers won't come out. But to answer your question, I handle private employers, and so I definitely hear the conundrum that employers are in, and many feel as if they're being twisted into a pretzel. And I also, part of being a good attorney, I believe, is being able to hear and empathize with both parts, know both sides, to be able to argue both sides, right? To be able to predict what arguments might come. And, it's I do actually see, some of the rationale behind these rules. They're saying, look, we're not just doing this to bust people's chops. We're not saying everyone has to get a tetanus shot to prevent lockjaw. Because if you don't want to get a tetanus shot to prevent lockjaw from happening, you don't have to. You step on a rusty nail, maybe you get some bad infections, but it won't spread to other people. And I think the concern is, hey, this was such a deadly and potent disease, overflowing, crowding hospitals, getting people up, people on long-term disability, mass, death and casualty. Let's try to rein it in. But the challenge is that you're right, private employers kind of get stuck in the middle, don't they? Because they're the ones enforcing, right? Someone comes in, you've got to ask your employees for vaccination proof. A customer wants to come in, ask them for the card. So it's a tough situation. I really empathize with what's trying to be accomplished by these mandates. And I listen to and hear my clients, business owners say, hey, listen to the sticky situation that I'm in. So then the question becomes, how do I help them? What do we do about it, right? How do we, what's the best way to enforce these, to comply with these rules? What's the best way to also communicate with your employees, so that they're actually, on board also, and there's not that extra friction between you and your employees.
Right. And for the most part, like where we're at, I'd say that the majority of the population is on board.
Yeah.
With vaccination, boosters, I've never had an issue in my restaurant where someone refused to show proof of vaccination or didn't have it.
Sure.
Like people are like, they come in here proudly. They got it open when they hit the door, But you're right that it is a sticky situation for employers and employees, because you're now kind of deputizing, we've all kind of been deputized in a way. And we weren't given much training for it, and it requires more work, so business is still kind of down, I think, across the board. Some places have gotten back to their kind of like 2019 numbers, but not everybody has. And then on top of it, you've got these additional tasks that you have to do, which sometimes are not convenient. It disrupts the flow of everything you're trying to do, and it causes certain levels of frustration where, it's hard enough sometimes, and like take a restaurant, for example.
Sure.
The problem with restaurants is everybody wants to eat at the same time, right? So you have a 35 seat restaurant and 35 people literally come to the door at the same time. Not only do you have to get them set up, start to get orders going in, but in the middle of it, you've got to stop and check everybody's vaccination proof and their ID. And people are fumbling. People are like, sometimes, I've had people like, oh, I forgot it. Let me text my son. He's at home. I'll get him to send me a screenshot of it. And you're like waiting for all this to happen before you can get their order. And you're like, okay, I'm going to come back to you. You run around. And it's like, it's a lot of work. I will say that. It is definitely, it is not fun.
Right. It's like, no, I think I wouldn't argue against that in the slightest. And for sure, I think it's like important, when I talk to my clients, like I need to hear their frustrations and say that they're valid. I think that what I've seen, as we both know, I'm sure, many of these issues around COVID have become very, very, people very polarized in their views on everything. And, people, I think, often don't maybe empathize with the other person's perspective and what's hard. So, for example, I see a lot of people who are not restaurateurs saying, well, what's the big deal? Why would anyone object to this? This is a great rule because, it's win-win, right? Your patrons are safe. You don't have to be the bad guy or bad gal or whomever. You can just say, hey, it's like not on me when the government's requiring me to do this. So, I got to ask your vaccination card. Kind of like as if, say, if you were a restaurant that, or let's say a restaurant or bar that, 40 years ago believed that 18 was a very young drinking age, but you couldn't really enforce, you can make your own policy and say, in my bar or my restaurant, it's 21 to drink, right? You'd be very unpopular, right? People would hate you and probably not go back. But when the state made it mandatory, a lot of restaurants and bars are very upset. It's before, I think we were probably very young at the time, but right, it's like, don't remember it. But, it's like, I think that people would say, this is going to make me unpopular. The crowd's going to hate us and they're not going to come here. But when it's mandatory and uniform for every restaurant, every bar, two things happen. One, that initial, I think, frustration, resistance kind of gives way right to acceptance. Now, when you go to a restaurant or bar and someone, say, brings their 20-year-old son home from college and he says, I'll order a beer, Dad. And they say, hey, can I, check your ID? Usually response is, oh, sure, here you go. It's not, how dare you? Old enough to fight in the war and I can't get a damn beer. So I think that my point is that I think that, as these mandates become, say, more routine, people will have to get that flow and they won't be as angry at the restaurateur, who can also, maybe some restaurateurs might actually want this this mandate. I think some are privately saying, thank God, because we're in New York City.
Yeah, sure.
Right, because we're in New York City. It's like people always mention they're proud card carrying backs folks. I believe in the science. I'm doing my part. And if you own a restaurant upstate New York, let's say, well, it wouldn't be covered by De Blasio, but let's say Staten Island, right? A little more conservative, different population towards vaccines. Some sites you can kind of let your patrons, the patrons know, hey, I know this is a pain, but Big Brother's watching, I got to do this. And the anger doesn't get transmitted onto you so much. So that might be a benefit, But it doesn't take away what you're saying, which is that I think that like there needs to be some maybe greater steps and guidance for restaurateurs and for business owners, right? How do we enforce this? Like, like how do we, one of the critiques about the testing, because in the state or federal orders, the provision is supposed to be either 100 or more employees for the Biden administration's push. Either they get like the vaccine or weekly testing and masking. So the weekly testing part, people say, well, who has to implement this? Like, do we do it? Do the employers bear the cost? So there's new guidance coming out from the Department of Labor saying, hold on, you don't have to pay for the testing. It's the employee's like job responsibility to do that if they're not getting the vaccine. But you're right, it's definitely not a smooth rollout by any means.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that, if I was a restaurateur in a restaurant, I'd be pretty pissed off these days, to be honest, So
I typically am, but that's not the new. Restaurant owners are typically pissed off.
I've known that in the few I've had restaurant clients for years, and
we're generally angry. Cool. You brought up something that we're going to take a break, but I want to pick up on that when we get back based off of a personal experience earlier this week. So hang tight, everybody.
Okay.
For the story. We'll be back in just a minute.
Stories are great. Yes.
Welcome back, everybody. Once again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Today, we're keeping it local, sticking to the good old NYC. Welcoming back to the show, employment lawyer Eric Sarver. He's also a fellow show host here on talkradio.nyc. He is the host of Employment Law Today, which airs Tuesdays at 5 or 6?
5 p.m.
5 p.m. 5 to 6 p.m.
Got it.
Eastern Standard New York City time.
Yep.
And we're talking about the whole heap of shit that's gone down here in New York City in the last couple of weeks. So my story, this, you said something about, government providing support for the increase in responsibility and workload for these businesses. So my 11, what's that?
Well, the need for that support, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So my 11-year-old, required to get vaccinated to go do a bunch of the things that she wants to do, and was eager to get it done. So we went the other day to a privately owned pharmacy in Brooklyn in Park Slope, and I've been in this pharmacy a bunch of times. They probably had like 300% of the staff that they normally have. Like there were a lot of extra people there. There were lines going straight down 2 aisles from the back all the way to the front to give out free tests and free vaccines. So my question, this is going through my mind being the business oriented type, is who's paying for the added staffing for something like this? I don't know any pharmacy owners to ask, like, hey, are you getting some kind of government assistance for having to bring on? I mean, this is a place that probably usually has about 5 or 6 people on staff at all times. And I guarantee there were 15 people, right? There was people just standing in the aisle working, just coordinating traffic because there were so many people coming in and out. And it was just like a conveyor belt. I don't know if you've come across that question or anybody in that industry, but that would be one nice addition. It's like, okay, we're going to offer you a subsidy. If you're going to do this, here's like a labor subsidy to help you, pay for an extra person to just like kind of deal with this, to make, everything run smoothly and feel like somewhat normal. Because that's what we're all really working for, right? Is like some sliver of normalcy of like life as it was before. I mean, the whole reason restaurants stayed open was like to offer people that, like, oh yeah, I can still go out and enjoy like a fraction of the life that I had before. We go through these steps, but I think in general, there hasn't been much assistance given to those businesses. I know in my case, it's been very little. Right. Has that come across your path? Any kind of labor subsidy or assistance for these organizations that are doling out, that are doing testing or vaccinations or?
It's a great question. I haven't seen a lot of like this question about like who's it to pay for, the extra assistance. What I do see though is that like often when the government has these additional regulations and they call upon the business to do more to enforce it. There often are some tax incentives or tax credits that the
Right.
company can get and apply to the government for. So, I mean, so you had the PPP and EIDL assistance back in 2020. That was actually not so much a merit-based. It wasn't that you had to earn it by doing extra. It was more that based on your revenue losses and such. So my point in bringing that up, Jeremiah, is that I think there are two types of ways when the government sort of helps lessen the burden for the business owner. One is by giving out some extra monetary support. It's not based on extra work by them, just basically like this is the economy, is what's happening. You know, you pay your taxes every year. It goes towards these type of laws get passed and legislation authorizes different tax breaks and PPP loans and such. Now, with the extra staffing, it would be interesting to see what happens if the government, say, does give out some kind of a tax break for, let's say, the cost. So, for example, you're hiring more people, but you're not, if you're hiring them, say, just to give out extra vaccine doses, the argument I might make is that you're not hiring them just for extra, say, to earn extra income, right? You're not hiring because you're growing in size and need to, say, cater to double the customer base. So I think you might be able to make that argument. The question becomes whether or not, business groups will, what usually I see happens in these situations is that business groups, right, tend to lobby, let's say if it's the city, right, New York City, they'll lobby the city council, the mayor's office. They'll say, hey, here are our concerns. You have the Better Business Bureau, other private groups set up, maybe the Chamber of Commerce locally, and the government often will consider those issues and either adjust with taxes or with incentives. So maybe it's something like good thing to talk, if you're in a kind of a business group with fellow business owners, to maybe go to the city and say, let's try to get this as an actual incentive, that's actually, but it's,
Yeah, I'd take a tax break. That's fine with me. So in the case of restaurants, is the New York Hospitality Alliance, and they're the biggest lobby group, essentially. And they've done a lot, but I don't think that's come up yet. I think they're they have bigger fish to fry right now, and everybody's just kind of ad hoc dealing with it. But that's the part that is frustrating, is that it's just all ad hoc. We're all just figuring out our own way of doing it. And some people are more vigilant than others. I mean, I've had people come in and they say, I'm so glad you asked. I'm like, oh, there's people that aren't. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, no. And I just personally don't want the damn fine. I really just, I don't need $1,000 or a $2,000 or a $5,000 fine. That's the main reason I do it. We got inspected last night, in fact.
Oh, yeah.
We've been inspected 3 times. So they're definitely coming out. I thought it would definitely be a little bit more of a battle. I've dealt with the Department of Health for so long that I thought it was going to be like that, and they're not nice. They're just not nice people. I'll say this: the key to NYC inspectors have been very nice so far. And I'm like, okay, if you're going to be nice, I'll be nice. But I get nasty with the Department of Health guys. I do.
Understandable. I've had clients hire me to petition a bad grade that was they thought registered or arbitrary in nature. But you raise a really good point, Jeremiah. I think it speaks to a lot of what I do, right? Because you mentioned that all these different rules, laws, and regulations, which are changing constantly. I mean, if you pull up news headlines from 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, they'd be very different than what they are today around the federal government's, at that point, pending, soon to be mandate, then the mandate, then it being stayed by the courts, right? Saying, hey, it's frozen, can't enforce it, can't implement it yet. Then you have the state healthcare workers, the city now. So everything keeps changing constantly. And your point, I think I heard you say, was that it's very hard, it's frustrating, right? For you as a business owner, to try to keep track of this because, you have to run your business. You spend your time, your energy, your focus, supervising your employees, ordering supplies, catering to your customers, whatever the case may be. So that's actually kind of where I come in, that I been as an employment, labor law, business law attorney, I read this stuff constantly. I'm reviewing, I'm reading, I'm tuning in to other broadcasts about this type of thing. And I'm reading the legislation that comes out, the summaries, and I get these also in my inbox by certain alerts from certain organizations and for us employment lawyers. So one thing I recommend any business owner do is that if you're running a business in 2021, you really want to tap into an employment law attorney to help you with the compliance. And you know what, if you're not actually there yet, let's say you're saying, well, attorneys can be a little expensive, I don't know, and maybe it's just not ready. At least have an HR company at your disposal. Someone, a professional HR folks, they're not all that expensive. There are large ones and small ones. You've got the large ones like ADP and TriNet, and the smaller ones that are kind of local consultants like, who can help you with this stuff, help you to make sure that you're following the mandates. Make sure you understand, the unemployment rules or the paid leave, right? A lot of folks don't realize, that now if you have an employee who says, hey, I need some time off because my child, got the second shot, let's say, and they're sick and they're home from school for a day and a half because they don't feel well, that actually has to be cut of their paid sick leave now. So you can't just say, well, all right, you take a personal day. But the thing is that an employment law attorney like myself, it can help you to have these policies in place. And the more you have policies in place that are evolving and changing with the law, the more that you then communicate those policies to your workers, the less chance for these conflicts, right? This tension, these complaints filed, or a complaint with OSHA or with the EOC, So I always recommend that. It's just such an important. I know it sounds like self-promotion because I represent businesses, but if I were a dentist, I'd probably be talking about how important it is to get 6-month checkup and floss. So it is what I do. It's
hey, this show is about entrepreneurship, baby. You gotta strike the hammer while the iron's hot.
But I think it's but it really is just something. It's true, and I think that the fines and such. If you are actually subject to a fine, I do recommend trying to fight it if there's argument to be made, because with these newer rules, it's harder for agencies to enforce them. So if you got a fine, let's say for an old health violation of a health code, it's been around for 30 years, or if the Department of Labor, let's say, found out you weren't paying your employees the proper overtime, you can fight that if it's not true. If it is true, you might want to negotiate. With these laws, I think there's a little more flexibility. I'm noticing that I think the city is noticing that people like yourself, Jeremiah, are doing the best you can. And you pointed out, I think that, right, they were a little nicer to you, the enforcement folks then. Yeah. So maybe if you have someone that says, look, this guy, he didn't bring his card, but he's been here 5 times in the last month. He gets the chicken parm every time. I know him. He's a good guy.
Right.
Show me his card. They might say, okay, just have him bring the card next time. Or
and I've heard of that happening. At other establishments where they've been a little tighter. I think it's, they're going harder on certain places. Maybe places are notorious for bending the rules or whatever, and I heard that happen where they were there one night and they didn't check a guy, but he was a regular, and they got a fine, and hopefully they fought it. I have a friend, a neighbor who's an attorney, and he was in here last night just having a drink, and he said the same thing. He was like, I always encourage people to fight it, no matter what, just fight it.
Yeah. I tend to encourage that as well, and it's
yeah, of course,
and it's part of what we do as attorneys. But I think also it's an interesting point, that. I think the city recognizes the most part that it's a hard thing to enforce. Everyone's doing the best they can. Will you have occasionally the super anal or just stricter type of enforcement agent? Yeah, sure. I'm sure you'll get some of those along the lines. And I think this kind of right where understanding each other's position comes into play. I think that I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job, Jeremiah, if I only came to my clients and said, okay, here's what the law says. Here's what the newest law is. Here's what you have to do. Here's do this and this, right? Implement this policy. I'm going to write this up for you in a contract or a handbook and have your employees come in. That's a lot of what I do. I do just that. Right. But it's I think with employee relations, for example, a lot of employers, if I kind of serve as an armchair, I don't want to say industrial psychologist, but I've seen what helps to decrease tension and conflict between employees and employers, and what leads to less disgruntled employees who might then decide to quit and sue or be fired and sue. It leads to better employee retention, employee morale. So I always encourage, if you have a concern, to communicate with your employees, have group meetings, and make it a safe place for people to air their concerns, because your employees might have frustrations that are identical to yours as a business owner. Mm-hmm. And you might not even realize that.
Right.
I don't like this any more than you do. And you might be able to tell them, hey, I've bet a lot of employees, for example, don't know that their employers don't enjoy enforcing all these rules. They might just think, oh, my employer just loves to be hard-headed and come down on me. And you might say, look, I don't want to do this any more than you do. And it kind of builds this we're in the same boat, camaraderie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of, that makes sense when I'm communicating it, but it's that communication link with your employees is key. And, and having those meetings and having updates in your handbooks and policies and inviting feedback, which is counterintuitive. A lot of folks say, if I invite feedback, it's Pandora's box. The floodgates will open and everyone will complain about every little thing. I'll never get any work done. I don't know. I found it to be counterintuitive. I don't know if you've had that
Right.
experience.
Well, I mean, they might complain, but all you have to do is listen. You don't have to answer anything immediately, especially still meetings. Just like, thank you all for your feedback. We'll get back to you, and that's it. And I think it really empowers them. It's a very valuable tool, and you don't have to respond immediately. You don't have to have a comeback. You don't have to do anything other than just listen.
So true. That's very
people
good.
People often just want that. All right. Well, I need to listen to Sam because he's telling me we got to go to break.
Oh,
so we got another one.
Another drill.
We'll be back. I know we could just go on and on and on. We'll be back in just a minute, guys. Hang tight. All right, folks, hopping right back into it, talking New York City employment and COVID regulation here with Eric Sarver. He's got a practice at Midtown for employment and business regulation, and he's also the host of Employment Law Today, which airs on talkradio.nyc Tuesdays, 5 to 6 p.m. Yes. So what else? What else do you have to share with us that you've seen a lot? You've been right on the front lines of it all. What are some of the big like pitfalls that business owners, employers can avoid that you've seen happen? You mentioned the insurance thing. I mean, is it? I'm wondering like if it's caused by several things, but all my premiums went up this year. Like everything's kind of renewing right now for me for next year, and everything went up. And I'm like, man, is it because they lost a lot of money over the last year? Is that part of it? Is it also, just the increased load that we have to cover now? Because as you pointed out, we have to cover our employees when they're home because their child got a shot and they're not feeling so well. And it's no longer a personal day for them. It's actually covered under sick leave.
Yeah. Well, I think with the insurance, are you referring to your insurance, like unemployment insurance contributions, right? And workers' comp, it's like, yeah. I think the answer to your question is probably right. It's probably both. It's probably that there is that need for revenue. One thing we as employment lawyers are seeing is that a lot of businesses that gave revenue to the Department of Labor closed down. So they need to make that up. So there is that. You might say I'm being cynical. I'm not usually a cynical person, believe it or not, even though I'm an attorney, but I try not to be. I think it's limiting in my opinion, but you are seeing more businesses being subject to not just code regulations, but strict enforcement of rules around, say it's called clopenings in New York City, about when someone can allowed to open and then or close a restaurant and then, or a bar and then working the next morning, how much space in between. And we're seeing, that's actually New York City type enforcement, but we're seeing regulations around, say, notification of wages going up. So there's a lot of the low hanging fruit theory, but also to your point, Jeremiah, you have more kind of written in for employees, more room for, I think, disagreements or issues that come up. So there's more of an insurance premium that goes on. And then of course, over time, these rates get raised for inflation adjustment and such. I love when you said what else, because it's wow. Yeah, and there's so much. It's great. If I had to give the highlights, what I'm seeing, I'd say this. I'm seeing a lot of I won't go through all the details. If I was speaking to, occasionally I'll speak to other lawyers about a continuing education course like the CLE or about the topic, and I'll give all the ins and out minutia of what the courts are holding and the arguments behind it. What I will say, I think is better purposes of our discussion today, is that, because that's boring, right? It's a lot of people. I love it, but people find it boring. But I'm seeing this. I'm seeing a lot of changes in laws around safety for workers. That's one of the key words. So if you're in New York State, not just the city, but New York State business, if you have people coming into a physical workplace, I'm seeing federal and state laws, especially around having an infectious airborne disease policy. So basically heightened safety standards called the HERO Act, right? You've got to have a certain plan. You have to submit it to the New York State Department of Labor. You have to communicate to your employees. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of federal, also just OSHA has stricter regulations around protections against COVID. We're seeing more and more laws changing around paid leave requirements. It's not just the 5 paid sick days a year in New York City or certain paid family leave time in New York State for having a child or a seriously sick condition or relative. We're seeing it for quarantine leave, becoming a little bit less common, I think, now, but there still is quarantine leave is an issue. If you have a child in school and they get sick or someone in their class gets sick, like, and they get home for 2 weeks, you can have, I think, a homeschooling scenario. You might have to have a person out on call. So you need to know what the law requires you as an employer to grant for leave. And of course, we're seeing, like, say, the whole kind of mask mandate and the whole vaccine mandate blow up. I think that, like, a lot of companies getting tripped up, whether they're a big company or a small company, whether they're a restaurant or a law firm, it's that they're getting, like, getting confused, Jeremiah, around the issue of accommodations. And it's a confusing issue. I've heard of daycare centers, like, where they say, well, let's have all the workers vaccinated. They're working with a young population of small children who can't get the vaccine, who can get sick, et cetera. They're very close quarters, but some of them actually mistakenly believe that if the employee raises a religious objection, then that's the end of the story, right? Then your hands are tied. And I've literally heard that expression from clients say, my hands are tied. And I actually know their hands are not tied. That if you can't grant a religious accommodation request because, let's say, like, the person is too much needed hands-on experience, or they can't be working remotely, you can't accommodate it, it's just too much of a hardship financially or operationally or just logistically, like, you can actually let them go and not have to pay them unemployment insurance. And that's a tricky one, right? Because, if you're an accounting firm or, say, a bookkeeping firm, and bookkeeper says, hey, I need to work remotely because, I have a religious objection to the vaccine. If they're keeping books, let's say they're a bookkeeper in-house for a small business. Well, can they work remotely and still do their job? Usually the answer is yes, right? They're using Excel spreadsheets, the email, they're kind of, like, chiming in through Google Dropbox and documents. But if you're a restaurant, I use this as an example all the time, right? If your executive chef, your head chef says, like, I can't get the vaccine, it's against my religious beliefs. And you say, okay, well, let's see, you're an executive head chef, right? You can't remotely zoom in, right? You can't cook food.
It's hard to dial that one in. Yep.
Yep. And you can't be siloed in the basement somewhere, sort of okay, I can give you an office, thing off to the side, you'll come in regular hours. You have to be there, as you pointed out, right, during the heavy dinner rush and the meals. You're in a closed quartered kitchen, like other workers. You're near the food that gets served to people. You might not be able to accommodate them. So I think it's, like, important if you're an employer and you get, say, an employee that comes to you with a request, like, to work remotely because of religious objection to the vaccine or medical condition, like, make sure you don't be rash. Don't just say no, hell no, not on my watch, right? But don't just, like, capitulate and say, I'm terrified of getting in trouble. Okay. You can go to an employment lawyer and say, what are my rights situation? And how do I approach this? What are the steps? What are the processes you have to put in place? That's what I'm seeing a lot of. It's, what do I have to do? What's the issue? And if I have to do something affirmative, grant a combination, give someone time off, how do I do it? Do I have to do it in steps? Like, do I have to document it? And do I have to make notes for the government that goes to the employee? Usually the answer is yes to all the above. That's what I'm seeing a lot of. I don't know if that's helpful to your audience, but maybe they're out there listening and are saying, oh, it happened to me. I had an employee that,
I know, I absolutely think it is. And a neighboring business owner, he's in food and beverage also. We had the same discussion earlier this week. Now, he scaled his business quite rapidly, where he's opened a number of locations really quickly. But what he hasn't scaled is his, like, employee communication and, like, his HR and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's just as important. Like, when you're scaling, like, you have to have that in place as well. It's just something we don't think about, especially as, like, the creators of these businesses. When you're coming from that background, it's not always so obvious to us. So I think it's a very great point that you bring up. I think it's something that everybody needs to hop on. We got one more quick break and we'll come back and wrap this one up. All right, hang tight, everybody. We'll be right back. All right, I wanted to hop right back on that for a minute because this did come up in conversation, and I think it's really, really important, just as my advice to business owners, especially those that are scaling and ramping up, is having those policies in place, systematized the same way you would your production. So if you're a coffee shop and you've got systems for, like, how coffee is made and what happens when somebody orders and all those things go, and that's what allowed you to open multiple locations and replicate that. You're going to have the same in place for employee communication, for whether it's COVID related, whether there's so many incidents that can happen between employees and middle management, like it all, like, and you have to systematize and have procedures in place for that. just as much as you do, you have to have that for your employees the same way you have that for your customers if you want to scale and expand. And as you pointed out earlier, that's like a portion at least of what you do, where you're providing employers with frameworks for that. So it really comes down to confidence.
Yeah.
Like if you're confident speaking to your employee, knowing that there is a clear path to resolution, you're going to be much more open in the discussion. You'll be more open to feedback. You'll feel at liberty to speak more openly with them, and vice versa. If they have a certain level of expectation of what the outcome is going to look like, they're going to feel more confident speaking with you, coming to you with the situation, allowing you all to work it out amongst yourselves, and not end up in a situation where you're being sued by an employee. Because even just that letter sucks. You're like, fuck, like even if nothing happens, it's just like, and if it comes at like a bad time where you're already having a bad day, it can put you, it can tip the scales in the wrong direction. And I really think it comes down to like that expectation that, okay, I know there's something in place here, just the same way when an employee comes into work, they know, okay, I know what I have to do today. There's no guesswork. When it's ad hoc and it's just kind of like, we've had too much of that, too much of like, okay, ad hoc regulation, ad hoc this, ad hoc that,
too much winging it, too much. Like,
it puts so much, it puts too much stress on the situation and both parties. And I'm a firm believer in having that needs to have the same weight in your company as your procedures for like producing whatever it is that you produce.
Absolutely, 100%, Jeremiah. I wish if I can we could play back the soundbite and record this part to some of my clients. Like, it'd be great to hearing it from not just
we will. I'll cut that out for you.
Oh, there you go. Already know in there.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's such a good point. As an employment lawyer, I say this all the time. It's like if you have clear policies in place that are based on laws in place, what you have to do, that are sensible and laid out in advance, it sets expectations for both parties, right? For employers and employees. Okay, this is what's expected of me. This is what I expect in return. These are my rights and these are my responsibilities. And that goes both ways. These are my rights as an employer and my responsibilities as an employer, right? These are my rights as an employee and these are my responsibilities to my job. And what I have seen is that I've done this now for 23 years. Oh, yes, that's right. 23 years, January. I can't believe, it's hard to believe.
We lost a couple of years. Like we lost
like a year, 2 years of COVID, but it was one giant like Jan, September,
exactly.
April, 2021 to 20. But what I'd say is like, it's so true that, these policies should be systemized and documented in writing. And that's why one thing it's because maybe a nice segue into it. So you asked me what kind of advice I give to businesses to do well today. It's that you need to have updated employee handbooks for two reasons. Well, one, the reason Jeremiah just pointed out, I think very eloquently there, right? Communication, people know their expectations, like what's expected of them, easier to resolve employee disputes. It's right here in the handbook. See, we've been through this like in trainings. Also, like some of the new laws require you to communicate in writing some of these policies. Like, for example, what is your COVID-19 safety protocol around infectious disease? Has to be in HR policy or employee handbook, right? What is your COVID-19 policy around vaccine mandates and religious protections? Has to be in writing somewhere, codified in it could be in written policies or procedures. It could be in written employee offer letters, but mainly it's in the employee handbook. It's like the Bible, of a business. And I think the other point you made right before that, Jeremiah, which is it's that if you're scaling, right, you might scale in so many other areas. You scale operationally, you scale in terms of what people have to do, the clock in, clock out procedures. And so why wouldn't you scale in an area in labor and employment law where it's such a potential minefield, full of landmines, right? There are so many like trip mines. You can step on the landmine and it explodes. And that explosion, maybe not going to lose a leg, but you will lose a lot of time, energy, and money in hiring me as an attorney. Like, you save money hiring me to do some compliance work and proactive measures than to hire me to defend you in a class action suit filed by 126 employees against you, or 8 named plaintiffs against you as a company, or fighting the Department of Labor because someone filed a complaint that they may not have filed. Like, if they had recourse with you and you had gone to them and said, okay, let me explain how this works. And if you have an issue, we can discuss it. So really important thing to scale, not to neglect your employment law, and again, I think employment law attorneys and HR professionals like work well together. It's a great combination to have in the corner.
And even all that aside, what I've found lately is like hiring someone like you just gives me peace of mind so that I can rest, like I can get quality sleep. Because you try to tackle these things sometimes yourself, especially if you're small. You wear all the hats and you're like, okay, I got to figure this out. I got to handle this. And you're laying in bed at night and you're like, it's really a non-issue, but you make the anthill into a mountain yourself because of your own ignorance. Where if all you do, you make a phone call and you're like, oh, it costs you a few $100. You're like, but I get to sleep tonight. It's like I just stayed at a 5-star hotel. I'm like, like I'm really not exaggerating. It's offered me such a peace of mind. And I think it's really important. Like know your lanes, as they say, like the things that commit to heart. Yeah, do it. Just take care of it yourself. But when you start to get into the dark, stop trying to be like Superman, and just like pass that baton, man, because you got more fires coming your way. That's for sure. And you just, if you spread yourself too thin, you're not going to be effective in handling any of it.
I think that's I've been saying that for years, and I say it for myself as well, right? I mean, I'm an employment law attorney.
It applies to us all. Yeah.
Right, like exactly. I live and breathe employment, labor law, business law in my day-to-day in my job. I don't do tech. I mean, I'm not super tech savvy, and like if someone taught me how to maybe do some of my own IT, could I figure it out? Yeah, I'm sure it would take a lot of like learning and time and frustration and pulling my hair out what's left of it, just like trying to get everything together. Yeah, it definitely would. So I leave that to the people that enjoy and love doing that. They talk in tech speak. I ask them to please clarify. They try to clarify. I say, can you clarify some more? And then one of my two tech guys, I think is really good. He says, think of it as this. He gives a metaphor. Okay, pretend this is like a building, and this is the top floor, and that's the like the window. We're taking care of the lower level windows before we get to this. Okay, that makes sense to me. Right. So I say the same thing. I mean, like I have a bookkeeper, I have an accountant. I can do my taxes, but I hate that stuff.
Yeah,
I'd rather deal with like a juicy issue of, your employees are saying, you have two different employees complaining. One says, I won't come to work if there's a mask mandate, or a vaccine mandate. Another one says, I won't come to work if there is not one because I feel unsafe. My anxiety gets triggered. I have anxiety disorder and I need a combination for that disability. And then you're pulling your hair out. You're trying to read EOC guidelines, which the guidelines could be 20 to 30 pages long, and I know what to skip through. I go through that and I say, okay, these 3 pages are the setting things up clause. This repeats what's already in. I just go to it's on page 20, page 28, and the first paragraph, But people say, how'd you read this so fast? I'm like, I know what I'm reading, like a settlement agreement. I know what the whereas clauses are. I know what it's going to say, So I think, and I'm sure in your field too, you know what to do. Whereas if I tried to do what you do, I'd probably quit in a night. I'd be like, I can't. How do you handle all this? So that's a really important point, Jeremiah. Yeah, it really is.
And scaling is all about delegation too. My one of my first employees and mentors, he's been on the show many times. He always asks me, how do you give 1,000%? And it comes down to delegation. You can do your 100, but that's it. After that, as you said earlier, your hands are tied. So you got to pass that baton. All right, we got to wrap it up, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Again,
my pleasure.
Eric does this every Tuesday at 5. He's got great guests. He's brought on some of my friends as well. And he's always chewing the fat on this stuff. It's a wealth of information and knowledge. So check him out Tuesdays, 5 to 6 p.m. on talkradio.nyc. Otherwise, where can people get in touch with you if they'd like to?
About to say that, actually, great question. Yes. If you guys have an issue with a vaccine mandate, like employment law, COVID-19, or anything else, and you need to get in touch with me, you can reach out to me by phone. I'm at 917-930-8684 is the best number to reach me at. I'm the law officer, Eric M. Sarver. My email, ems@sarverlawfirm.com, SARVERLAWFIRM.com. Or you can just Google me also, like in my website will come up and some publications I've done and all these different things. You'll find me. But yeah, happy to help clients with this, defense, compliance, all that good stuff. I hope I helped your audience today.
I definitely think you did with COVID and beyond. So thank you so much. Just some great stuff. And there will definitely be some post-production. We'll rip out some of those bites. I'll get you that one file and we can send it out to the world.
Thank you. All right. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a great weekend. We're out for a couple weeks because of the holidays. We'll catch you the first week in January. Have a great holiday. Peace out.
Yep. Take care.